want to be heard, um, uh, then know that we're broadcasting now. So avoid the. And if you do want to be heard, speak up. And if you want to be seen, we'll point the camera at you. Say again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's starting it right now.
Yes, we're broadcasting. Right. Speak up if you want to be heard on the broadcast. Don't if you don't want to be heard. This is called The Tale of Three Dogs. The Tale of Three Dogs.
Oh,
Tale is spelled T-A-L-E, by the way. I just got that. I didn't even realize that was not an intentional pun. If you brought your Bibles,
you say that now.
right? Turn to Samuel. First Samuel. This is very interesting. The Bible, we don't believe there are multiple reasonable interpretations. It's a little bit too close. Let me see if that's better. Yeah, that's a little better. Test. Okay, yeah, that's better. We don't believe there are multiple reasonable interpretations of a red octagon that says STOP on it. You can tell a cop all day long. I interpret a red octagon with STOP to mean hit the gas, go fast. That won't fly in court. There's only one reasonable interpretation of a red octagon that says STOP on it. That's hit the brakes. Otherwise, you're going to drive out into traffic and hit cross traffic. We don't believe the Bible has multiple reasonable interpretations like a mirror where it just reflects whatever your opinion is or whatever your values are. We believe the Bible is God's opinion, and I humble myself when I look at the Bible and I accept what it says. I don't always like what it says, but I accept what it says. It's not up to me to interpret it or change it in any unreasonable way to suit myself. And on the contrary, it's up to me to as humbly and clearly and as honestly as possible interpret what it says, whether I like what it says or not. So this is the tale of three dogs. This comes from the book of 1 Samuel chapter 17, if you brought your Bibles. And now there's a little subtlety around that preamble that I just gave, because you won't find three dogs in 1 Samuel chapter 17. So you might be thinking, hey, Aaron, you're making up some new interpretation of the scriptures. No, this is not a new interpretation of the scriptures. It's pulling out three theological truths from the same chapter without reinterpreting it or interpreting it differently, just noting some things that are implicit in this chapter, three theological truths that are exemplified by three dogs that do, by the way, probably have tails, although one of them was a Doberman. She didn't have much of a tail. She was genetically predisposed to having a tail, but they cut it off on a Doberman. They clipped the ears. Yes, ma'am. One more time? Oh, okay. We're going to zip through a bunch of 1 Samuel 17 kind of to make the point. Y'all are pretty familiar with it probably anyhow. Starting at verse 20. Oops, wait, no, I have to back up. Stand by. Okay, no, I have to start earlier than that. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll read fast because we don't want to spend a lot of time reading every word. Just sort of get the feel for it, and we'll get to the dogs as we get to the dogs. So, starting in the beginning, verse 1, 1 Samuel 17. After Numbers, after Judges, 1 Samuel 17, starting in verse 1. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Socoh, which belongs to Judah, and they camped between Socoh and Azekah, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing these authentically. You'll have to forgive the pronunciation if it's not good. In Ephes Damim, Saul and the men of Israel, Saul was the king, they were gathered and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up in battle array to encounter the Philistines. The Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, while Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. Then a champion came out from the armies of the Philistines named Goliath, from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Most experts that are smarter than I say that's about 9 feet tall. This was a pretty tall dude. 6 cubits in a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was clothed with scale armor, which weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze. That's heavy. He also had bronze greaves on his legs and a bronze javelin slung between his shoulders. The shaft, 1 Samuel chapter 17, Tara, if you want to join us, and we're on verse 7. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. That's a huge spear. And the head of his spear weighed 600 shekels of iron. That's very heavy. His shield carrier also walked before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel and said to them, "Why do you come out to draw up in battle array? Am I not the Philistine, and you servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall become our servants and serve us." Again the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words, that's the king and all his mightiest warriors, heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So the first dog that we're going to talk about is the demoralized dog. Say demoralized. Demoralized, yeah. They were dismayed. These were the mightiest men in all of Israel. They were so afraid of this big, tall Philistine. They were all shaken like leaves on trees. They were so scared, even though they were the toughest guys. Demoralized. They had no spirit. There was no fight left in the dog. We used to, when I was in the world, I hung with a band that we played. We did a lot of drugs. It was a really wild, sex and drugs and rock and roll, the whole thing. I didn't grow up in church. And this dude, Jeffrey Johnson, we called him Jufers. He had this mangy little mutt, and we never knew it was a mixed breed. It was a big mix, and it was pretty raggedy looking. The carpet smelled like stale beer. Everybody was taking LSD and eating hallucinogenic mushrooms and stuff. It was a very wild scene. And this dog, and I kind of have a way with dogs. I'm better with dogs than I am with little kids. Some people they know what to do with babies. I kind of know what to do with dogs more than with babies. And most dogs warm up to me, but this dog was terrified of everybody, including me. There was something really wrong with this dog. And it would look the way you would look if you were standing on the beach and you saw like 1,000-foot tall wave coming at you, the look that would be in your eyes. It was beyond having a tail between its legs. It was so demoralized, it didn't even have the strength or the energy to put its tail between its legs and quiver or anything. It was even beyond that. It was like it was just in shock, and it was so bewildered looking. And I'd pet it and I'd speak softly to it, and it would just look at me like that. And with others, it was even worse. And I kind of have a way with dogs. So we were very crude. I was in that whole sex and drugs and rock and roll thing. So we all speculated out loud and very rudely, and we thought humorously that Jeff was committing bestiality with this dog, and this dog was victimized and didn't feel like a dog because it was Jeff's woman or whatever. We were cruel about it. But there was, you just got that sense of resignation in this dog's eyes. It was like it was so scared it couldn't even quiver. It was just, it was demoralized. There was no fight in that dog. So the first dog in 1 Samuel 17 is the demoralized dog. So scared it can't even quiver. These were the mightiest men in Israel. It was King Saul and all of his army, his mighty warriors. They were dismayed and greatly afraid, and none of them would stand up to the Philistine, who was openly defying the armies of the living God. We're going to skip a little bit. David was a shepherd. He was the son of Jesse. And he comes to the camp. He's not a mighty warrior. He's not a fighting man. He doesn't have a sword or a spear or anything. He's a shepherd boy. He plays nice music. He takes care of the sheep. He's not considered worthy of going to the battle lines because he's just a kid. And he goes to take them some food and stuff. Jesse says to verse 17, "Take now for your brothers an ephah of this roasted grain and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to your brothers. Bring also these 10 cuts of cheese to the commander of their 1,000, and look into the welfare of your brothers, and bring back news of them. For Saul and they and all the men of Israel are in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. Only they weren't fighting. They were demoralized. They were so scared they couldn't quiver barely, right? The demoralized dogs. So David arose early in the morning and left the flock with the keeper and took the supplies and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the circle of the camp while the army was going out in battle array, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines drew up in battle array, army against army. Then David left his baggage in the care of the baggage keeper and ran to the battle line and entered in order to greet his brothers. As he was talking with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine from Gath, named Goliath, was coming up from the army of the Philistines, and he spoke these same words, and David heard him. When all the men of Israel saw the man, they fled from him and were greatly afraid. They were demoralized. There was no fight in those dogs. The men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who is coming up?" That's loosely translated as like, "Ay caramba," holy, bleep, something that's not very godly, right? It's have you seen this man who is coming up? Surely he is coming up to defy Israel. And it will be that the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. Then David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel?" He's kind of interested now. "For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God?" David is thinking more clearly than all the demoralized dogs that are so afraid they can't barely quiver. He's remembering who his God is. He's remembering that while he may be just a little shepherd boy, he serves a very big God. He may be a minor league little guy, but he serves a major league God. He's not nearly as afraid of the Philistine as he is faithful to his God, believing in his God. Unlike all these demoralized dogs, the mightiest fighting men of Israel, who were so scared they couldn't barely quiver. For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God? David is thinking clearly. The people answered him in accord with this word, saying, "Thus it will be done for the man who kills him," repeating the daughter, the riches, the this, that, and the other, all the benefits that will come to the person who kills the Philistine. Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger burned against David. David was thinking clearly. Eliab was not. Eliab was one of the mighty warriors who was so afraid he couldn't barely quiver. His anger burned against David, and he said, "Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your insolence and the wickedness of your heart." So our second dog is the deceived dog. Deceived. Eliab tells David, "I know the insolence and the wickedness of your heart." David was not insolent and he was not wicked. In fact, he was the only one on that field that day that was seeing truth clearly, seeing God for who he was, seeing the little itty bitty 9-foot tall Philistine, which is pretty small compared to David's God, clearly for who the Philistine was. David was the only one thinking clearly, but they were accusing him of being insolent and being wicked when he was the only one speaking the truth. That was a deception. Eliab was deceiving David, impugning his motives unrighteously and very inaccurately, I might add. The deceived dog, I used to hunt upland birds when I was younger. I had this beautiful Browning over under 12 gauge shotgun, and I'd hunt pheasant and quail and stuff. And the dogs that you hunt with, a pheasant, if you guys don't know, it's this big, but there can be this much grass on the ground, and somehow that pheasant can hide in this much grass to the point that a dumb human 5 feet tall can't see it right underfoot in this much grass. They have a gift for making themselves very small and making themselves look like grass. But the dogs aren't fooled. If the dog has a nose, the dog will smell the pheasant, and it'll come up and it'll go on point. Its little tail will quiver, and it'll put its nose there. And you know that if you kick that clump of grass where the dog is pointing, something's going up, and then it's coming down, and you have something delicious for the oven or the barbecue, right? So these dogs, they're pretty faithful. They're very hardworking. They're not very rebellious. They're trained from a very young age. The good dogs, they let them be puppies for about a year. They don't give them any discipline for the first year. from what I understand, because they want to get all that puppiness out of them. If they start training them too early, they don't end up being as good of soldiers as if they give them a year to sow their wild oats and play around and stuff. Then they start training them hard after about a year. These dogs are extremely loyal, extremely dutiful. If one dog is pointing, the other dogs will come up behind it in formation and point at it, and they'll all point and respect each other's point. They won't get in each other's way and stuff. They work better than a lot of humans do sometimes. And but if you take one of these dogs and you take a tennis ball and you go like that with a tennis ball behind your back at 8 a.m. in the morning, you got to go out there and go at 5 in the afternoon, because the dog's still out there looking for the tennis ball. And he ain't going to come home for dinner or water or get any sleep, because he's so loyal and so faithful. 8 hours later, the deceived dog, my master said there was a tennis ball out there. I can't let him down. I'm not going home without that ball in my mouth because I trust my master, right? So that's a deceived dog. Eliab was trying to deceive David. A deceived dog. Say deceived. Yeah, right. So Eliab is saying, I know your insolence and the wickedness of your heart, neither of which were true. They were slamming David and accusing him of stuff that wasn't true. But David said, what have I done now? Was it not just a question? Then he turned away from him to another and said the same thing, and all the people answered the same thing as before about what good stuff would come to the man who killed Goliath, the quote-unquote giant, which was a pretty puny giant compared to the height of our God. One moment. Okay, verse 31. When the words which David spoke were heard, they told them to Saul, and he sent for him. David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail on account of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. He's standing in front of all the mightiest soldiers who are so scared they can barely quiver, and the little shepherd boy is saying, I'll fight the Philistine. Then Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant was tending his father's sheep when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock. I went out after him and attacked him and rescued it from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. Then Saul clothed David with his garments and put a bronze helmet on his head, and he clothed him with armor. David girded his sword over his armor and tried to walk. So the third kind of dog is a distracted dog. Distracted dog is not very effective in battle. Say distracted. Right. Liebchen was this red Doberman Pinscher, purebred red Dobie that I fell in love with when I was about 19 or 20 years old. I rented, my parents were going to move away. I was still in college here. So they rented a room at a house in Woodland Hills. And the landlady had this beautiful purebred red Doberman named Liebchen. And Liebchen was attack trained. She would tear somebody's throat out. She was the only dog I ever saw go after another dog without sniffing its butt first. Usually dogs figure out friend or foe by sniffing under each other's tails. I had Liebchen out for a walk one day, and another dog got within about 10 feet of us, and Liebchen was airborne from me to that dog off the ground for 10 feet with her jaws headed at the dog's throat without even a sniff, without a hello or anything. It was poetry. It was beautiful to behold. It was like Lynn Swann catching a long bomb. You know how Lynn Swann used to jump in the 70s? Yeah. She was on a choke chain, so I held her back. She didn't bite the other dog in half, but she was beautiful to behold when she was in action. She was incredible. But Liebchen could be distracted. There was this big picture window in the living room, and if a cat would come to the other side of that picture window and look at Liebchen like this, Liebchen would be like, you could hear the frustration and the anxiety in her voice, and she'd be going, cat, 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 and she'd be screaming at me to get the cat, cat, right? And it wouldn't be an authoritative bark. It was a frustrated bark. It was like, you could feel it, she was so frustrated. And you could go 10, 20 feet that way and open the front door and go, Liebchen, to let her out. and she was like this against the kitchen window, so intently. You couldn't get her to go out that door. She could have gotten what she was seeking. She could have gotten what she was so frustrated after. She could have bitten that thing in half with one, like alligator-like jaws, you know. But she couldn't be bothered by the fact that you just opened the front door to let her out because she was distracted. She couldn't take her eyes off that object of her frustration and her angst, right? That's a distracted dog. She had the opportunity to do this, but she couldn't see the path. She was distracted. So David tried to walk in this armor. A distracted dog is not very effective. He was distracted by all this heavy stuff on him. He couldn't fight with that. He couldn't barely walk with the armor, right? So David, verse 34, where were we? Oh, verse 39, David girded his sword over his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. So David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. And David took them off. He took his stick in his hand and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's bag, which he had even in his pouch, and his sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. And strangely enough, out of all the messages you've ever heard of from this chapter of the Bible, we're not going to describe the fight. Everybody's already heard the fight, right? The point of this message, the tale of 3 dogs, T-A-L-E, right? Tale of 3 dogs is David could not be demoralized. David could not be deceived. David could not be distracted. There was all kinds of stuff going on that makes for very ineffective dogs. A demoralized dog, it's so sad it can't barely quiver. It's not much use. A deceived dog is going to be out in the field. It's going to die of dehydration before it finds that tennis ball because it was deceived, right? A distracted dog can't get the object of its desire even if you open the door wide open to let it walk out because it's so inordinately focused on the source of distraction. David was a hero first and foremost because he kept his eyes on God. That's important. But note that as a consequence of keeping his eyes on God, unlike the rest of Israel, the mightiest warriors and the king, the consequence of his keeping his eyes on the Lord was he couldn't be demoralized. He couldn't be deceived. He couldn't be distracted. For us to get demoralized, and I get demoralized sometimes, for us to get distracted, I get distracted sometimes. For us to get deceived, I get deceived sometimes. I have to take my eyes off the Lord. If I'm keeping my eyes on the Lord, I don't care how scrawny I am, you're a big God. If I'm keeping my eyes on the Lord, I don't care if I'm happy today. It's not about my happiness, it's about your happiness. If I'm keeping my eyes on the Lord, I don't care if I'm successful or rich or famous or any of that, because it's not about my success, it's about your success. If I'm keeping my eyes on Him, I can't be demoralized. I can't be deceived. I can't be distracted. Lord Jesus, I lift up everybody hearing my voice, whether it's here at the chapel or in cyberspace, watching from Nigeria or Pakistan or Tennessee or wherever it might be, Glendale. And I pray that all of us would keep our eyes on you so firmly, so fervently, so strongly that we couldn't be demoralized or deceived or distracted, just like David. And if there's anybody hearing my voice that isn't born again, I pray they would be born again by an outstanding miracle of your Holy Spirit in your way and in your time. I pray all these things in your precious and holy name, Jesus. Thank you for joining us. We love you. We'll see you next week. We don't ask for donations. As you know, if this is the place where you want to give your tithes and offerings, there's a chapel tab off of motorgospel.org with a PayPal for it. But while it's important that you don't rob God, it's not critical whether you give your tithes and offerings to Motor Gospel or somewhere else. That's between you and God. So don't ever feel any pressure to do it here. We love you. God bless you. And we'll see you next week.
Finish your errand.